Well, I'm super glad that we are here today, and I'm glad that it's both audio and video, John. But yeah, I just want to give everybody a quick introduction about John. He's been a leader in multiple industries, at least the past 30 years. And I'd love, John, if you want to give a quick introduction of yourself, and then also I'll just want to dive into some questions here as well. But John, I'll just hand off the mic to you.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast. Really happy to do it. I've had a very strange career. My degree's in engineering, but I started out my career actually in the entertainment industry and spent 1 year. I was a member of the Stagehands Union for several years. And my first year in college, I studied theater and dropped out of college to go back to work because I realized I was making more money in the Stagehands Union than my professors were making. So spent a few years in that and then switched to electrical engineering when I went back to school. So I've never run across anybody else that switched from theater to engineering. So that was kind of a unique path. Started out working in the engineering industry for a utility, then went to a consulting firm and then had the opportunity to transfer down to Houston to start their regional office. Started that in 99, grew it up to just under $500 million in revenue by 2012. Left and was getting ready to start going on my own, out on my own. Of all things, developing Valvoline Quick Lube franchises. So that all, as you know, that all kind of played into my motorsports activities.
Because aren't you also a race car driver as well, John?
I am. That's been a dream of mine, and actually got started racing when I was 25 and raced semi-pro up until I still do. So I'm still racing. Don't get to as much as I would like to, but yeah, I certainly have.
That's amazing. And kind of to piggyback off your intro and just your racing career, I feel like you have an eclectic background from, starting out in stage and theater. So starting out as a thespian, so super kind of getting a lot of abilities in public speaking, interpersonal communication, while acting, and also just switching over to engineering, which is more like the logical, analytical approach. Like, just explain, just like to just learn and dive a little deeper into like how that shift happened, and then also 25. Well, I'm assuming you also were just racing as a hobby, karting as well growing up. Okay.
Not growing up. I was a car geek from day one. Always worked on cars with my dad. He was a farm boy, so we worked on everything. Saved up all my lawn mowing money 1 year to buy a 200-piece Craftsman tool set, I think when I was 13, and probably still have most of those tools. I actually worked on the other side of the microphone, so I started out doing sound and lights for some local area bands. And when I was a teenager, and a performing arts center opened up and had the opportunity to go to work for them as on their technical staff, mostly as a sound engineer, and then joined the Stagehands Union and got to work with a lot of different Broadway, off-Broadway, and a lot of big rock bands for several years. Went to 1 year of college to study theater technology. Realized I knew more than what they were teaching, and as I mentioned, I was doing really well.
Did you start
as a union stagehand? So
did you start?
So I went back to work.
Did you start your theater degree just because in your teen years you were working as a stagehand with lighting and doing all that, and it seemed like that was kind of like what you just wanted to do as your career, and then you realized that you're kind of smarter than the teacher in the room. And
well, I yeah, I went into that because certainly what I was doing, and
Mm-hmm.
it was an interesting path. Literally, my freshman year, I took almost all junior and senior level classes,
Wow.
and I won't say that I was smarter than any of my professors, but I did make a lot more than any of my professors.
Wow.
So it's an interesting career. You work a lot of hours.
Mm-hmm.
100-hour weeks were not unheard of.
So how were you able to fit college and these 100-hour weeks all into your schedule? That sounds like you had to really balance and juggle a lot of different things and really basically take the most value out of your time.
It was difficult, and even I put my way through engineering school, still working as a union stagehand. So just because of the nature of the industry, you're busy Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Mm-hmm. And so I would tell my teachers, it's like, hey, here's the situation. Here's what I do for a job. You won't see me these days, but if I need to take tests ahead of time or do whatever, I'll work with you however. And so, it was not unheard of to get, 18 hours in a day
Did you
or more.
Go to class?
And so
with that kind of deal with with your professor. Okay. So you're just
yeah.
Wow.
And as soon as I showed up in class, I was up front with my professors. And they were all more than happy to work with me. Wow. I had a young daughter at the time, and it's funny. She spent years on my lap studying calculus and chemistry and physics with me, and she went into art. So I don't know. I guess she got that creative side of the brain. But yeah, it was fun. By the time I graduated college, I did it for about another year. And by that time, I had 10 years in the industry, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. I just can't do this anymore.
Right. And just curious, you said you're making more than your professor. Was it just like hourly work because you're doing 18-hour days, or were you getting paid per hour at that time, or was it like you had to get specific productions done and it'd be per project?
No, back then,
how'd that work?
Which would have been early 80s to early 90s. I mean, I started out, in the early 80s making, $10 an hour. And our union rules, you got overtime after 8 hours, double time after 12. And if you didn't get 8 hours rest between days, you started the next day on overtime until that 8 hours was up. So literally the vast majority of the time that I was working, I was getting paid overtime, whether it was time and a half or double time. So, that worked out really well.
That kind of gives you a lot of motivation to work those extra hours. It seems like if I was definitely in that position, I'd love to be working and getting paid double time. And so very cool.
Well, people don't realize, it's amazing because, we'll start setting up a show at 5 a.m, and then it's not unheard of to get done, between 1 and 3 the next morning. A lot of times I would sleep at the theater before the next day, to set up with for the next show. And I wanted to actually take cat naps whenever I could. In fact, there was one show that we did with the Kennedy Center. We did 2 shows a day, and we changed shows each day. So we were always setting up for another show. And literally, the stage manager would tell us, "Hey, go ahead and take a quick nap now." So I'd lay my head down on the soundboard. I may get 5 or 10 minutes of rest. He'd come in, wake me up. He said, "Okay, you got your next cue coming up." Oh, okay, yeah, I'm ready. Let's go.
Wow. So that kind of gives your mind training to be ready kind of at all hours. So it doesn't matter if it's 1 a.m. and you have a 10-minute cat nap, you have to be on the go, or 9 a.m. or 5 a.m. setting up the production. That's
Yeah,
really good
yeah,
mental training. But yeah,
absolutely.
And then your first year, you started out as a theater technician, then you switched over into engineering. What kind of engineering did you say again? You started into?
My degree's in electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. Okay.
And it was actually driven because of the entertainment industry, because that was literally the time that, the lights were coming out that would pan and tilt and change colors. And I was, very well acquainted with the company that actually developed the first generation. And my intent was to go work for them once I graduated. It was one of those, by the time I graduated, I was so burnt out with the whole industry. I was like, no, I got to do something else. So I didn't go work for them, but looking back, I don't know if I made the right choice or not, but it seemed to pay off pretty good. So, I'm happy about it.
Yeah. And then what was the first thing that you got into after college again? You first started, because I pretty much know your career from the time that you kind of in the late 90s that you've just been kind of a manager director position. But right after college, besides racing, what was was that kind of, I bet it was probably, it supplemented your income. I'm sure the racing did, but I'm sure it wasn't your main source, right?
Oh, actually, I was putting a lot more money in than I was getting out of it, and always have. But I immediately worked for an electric utility, basically on construction and operations, and spent a few years there. Then a consulting firm in Kansas City called me up and said, "Hey, why don't you come over? Some people have recommended you to us." So I went over there, and that's when I started my, consulting career. Was only in Kansas City for a while, but one of my clients was a refinery in Corpus Christi, so I had the opportunity to actually go and work there for a year and a half on the refinery operations team.
Wow,
so spent some time there, and then went to Houston. And it was interesting because the work we were doing, was pretty much split down the middle between electric utilities and industrial. And so we wanted to take the knowledge that we had learned, in the industrial market, come to Houston and start selling it there. Came to Houston, and oil had hit $8 a barrel, so there was no industrial work going on. And so ended up working for a lot of utilities, and then some things changed, and then the industrial world came back. So I've flipped back and forth quite a bit throughout my career.
Wow. So just curious, living in Corpus Christi, was that a lot of just, I know it's a partial beach community, but is it like a lot of on the Gulf, like a lot of kind of oil wells and oil mine, or oil wells or oil rigs?
There's a lot of offshore. There's offshore production, but it actually has, for the size town of it, is the biggest industry is refining and chemicals. So there's an awful lot of really large, complexes right along the ship channel that are in refining and chemicals. So, that's the biggest industry, certainly in Corpus Christi.
Because I was interested when you were saying that you wanted to bring kind of the industrial knowledge and move it to Houston from I guess it would be from Kansas City and Corpus Christi, that kind of knowledge into Houston.
Well, it was interesting. At that time, the utilities were the whole industry was going through a reorganization. And utilities weren't sure what they were going to be when they grew up. And they started requiring the large industrial complexes to own their own high voltage substations. And so I took my utility knowledge from the substation industry, then applied it to large industrials, and then learned a lot about, surprisingly, operations inside refineries and chemical plants. Because when we were doing projects, we would have to work around, usually their turnaround schedules, and work with the operations team so that we could have we could shut down parts of the refinery, or even, maybe just a single, very large motor, so that we could, change out some of the equipment. And, that was the reason they brought me in on the operations side, because we were actually doing a lot of project work on their high voltage and medium voltage electrical system. And I was very intimately involved in all of that. So that was a fun time. Yeah.
And also in your bio pages, you mentioned that you have a lot of experience kind of leading growing ESOP companies. Also, first, I looked at the acronym ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. But if you want to kind of give our listeners kind of a background on ESOP, and also if you can share some benefits and challenges of that model.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm a huge fan of ESOPs. I think they're one of the best ways that owners can transition out of their companies to turn it into an ESOP. Burns McDonnell, which was the engineering company I started with in Kansas City and then ended up with in Houston, was an extremely successful ESOP. So it was 100% ESOP. So 100% of the stock was owned by 100% of the employees. And it changes the culture of a company because you are working for yourself, because you're awarded stock, you're paid dividends. And so, it's your company. And one of the ways our former CEO explained it was, of course, we all travel a lot and get rental cars. He goes, when was the last time anybody voiced a rental car? It's not yours. You just take it back and you're done with it. But if it's your own car, hey, it's totally different. You take care of it. And, it's the same thing with these, because the company did so well. That was the majority of their retirement, when they left.
And for that, what's the typical equity structure per employee when you're kind of structuring an ESOP? How much would the CEO typically have, the C-suite, and then also just the rest of the employees?
Well, usually the allocation is built as a percentage of your allocation of stock is based upon a percentage of your total compensation. So, and there's, as soon as I say that, there's every flavor of ESOP, that you can imagine. But the ones I worked at, you were given shares based just strictly upon a percentage of your total income. So, nice. the CEO got the same percentage as a person working in the mailroom. Now, obviously, the dollar value is different, but the percentage is exactly the same.
I see. So that's interesting. So I guess the higher up you are, the more incentivized, because I guess essentially you're getting paid a little bit more unless you're probably the head of sales. You're more incentivized to make sure that the company is good. But if you're kind of it seems like if you're one of the lower level folks in that structure, I guess they're still incentivized. Since it's just a percentage, but it's not it's not probably as life changing as, for example, if you're the CEO or one of the C-suite.
It's really interesting, and it's one of those things that time is your friend, because certainly over the years, as you get more stock and it appreciates, hopefully, and then you get dividends along with that, the value is quite a bit more. We always used to laugh when I would go to the board meetings. We had two ladies that worked in payroll, and they literally used to pass out checks when you got physical checks, and we'd pass around their ESOP statement, and they were both multimillionaires, and we're like,
wow,
if they earned just 5% on their money, they would make significantly more than they're making now in salary. So when they retired, and I say they were they were certainly millionaires.
Wow.
So they actually did better in retirement than when they were working. So, it's just that whole.
That's got to feel really good.
Oh yeah.
Does the company
absolutely?
have
And you
to,
see,
in order for that kind of big payout at the end, does the company have to go public in order for that to happen, or how does? No, okay. So it could be at any.
Not at all.
You can just cash out your shares essentially, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically. Okay, well, one of the things that you have to plan for as an ESOP, and this is where some certainly get into trouble, is you always have to have a cash reserve for repurchase liability. So it's, if your company's been around for a while, it's pretty easy to project, hey, this many people will leave, each year, and, the value of their stock is approximately X. And so you have to make sure that you have money available to repurchase those shares. Usually where ESOPs get into trouble is a very large majority shareholder, say the original owner, he's selling his stock into the ESOP program. But when he leaves, they have to cash him out. And so if they haven't planned properly for his exit or some of the other board members' exits, then they usually have to get pretty highly leveraged. And that's the one, I guess, downfall of an ESOP is if you put too much leverage on the company. So, it's all about planning. And I've helped some people set up some ESOPs. And that part of it's very enlightening to them. They're like, oh, well, we hadn't realized that we need to start budgeting for that immediately. I was like, oh, yeah. And, they may put in certain rules that, maybe only one senior officer can retire in a year or each year, and then, have the option to pay off their shares over maybe a period of 3 to 5 years to not put the company in a real, financial bind to pay them off. But yeah, I mean, think from an ownership structure, if it's done right and you think about the right things, and really it's all about what kind of advisors you work with when you set it up and actually execute it. I think it's a phenomenal ownership structure for really, I won't say any size company, but certainly middle market. And even when I left, Burns McDonnell, we were a multi-billion-dollar company that was an ESOP. So
when you joined,
started out Burns a lot smaller.
When did you start out? What size did you start? So I'm assuming that growth was probably significant. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, when the company purchased itself from its owners, they had $8 million in shares, valued at $1 a share. Those 8 million shares appreciated, quite a bit over the next several years. So,
wow,
it was very good, to say the least.
That's amazing. So, just to kind of get just one more thing to get back onto an ESOP business structure. Is there any other advice that you give leaders looking to transition in ESOP? I know that timing's one of the most important things, making sure that you plan everything. But is there any other advice that you give leaders transitioning into ESOP?
It's probably the same advice I give leaders all the time. You need to start planning your exit, years before you want it to happen. Whether you're going to convert to an ESOP or even whether you're going to sell, to private equity, to, another company in your industry. So you're a strategic purchase. It's all about the planning, and it's not something you can do at the last minute. Though people have, and those are usually the companies that get in trouble. because they haven't planned for the retirement of the owner or some, very senior staff within the company. So they have to take on a lot of debt. It all comes to, and I say this, begin with the end in mind. A lot of people aren't even familiar with ESOPs as a structure. And so they may hear about it, when they're getting ready to exit, and don't set it up properly just so that they're, covered when they do exit.
And you had one of your companies go public as well, right? Or one of the companies that you work with?
There was actually, when I went from Burns McDonnell, I went to Quanta. Like I said, I was getting ready to start my own valvoing quick lube franchises, and I went to Quanta Services, which was really an aggregator of utility construction companies, and they were a public company. I was involved in an IPO, and it was actually a friend's company, and a group of us invested very heavily in the company, and then it went public a few years later, and that was an interesting experience. He was in a CEO group I was in, and so we got to see, what it takes to actually take a company public, and it's an unbelievable amount of work. I really had no idea. And talking to him, he's like, yeah, I had no idea what it was going to take to go public. It was a very successful IPO, but the time they spent on it was just incredible.
And I know that you said that you were an investor, but did you spend any time, were you on the board of that company that IPO'd? You said it was Qantas? Or not? What was it?
No,
sorry, not
that was actually, that was LGI Homes.
Okay.
And, I wasn't on the board. Actually, he was in a CEO roundtable group that I belonged to, the owner. And so, like I said, we got to see all the internals, workings of what it takes to go public. If you can get there, it's a great exit strategy. It is a lot of work.
From your experience, kind of viewing it from that group, and also being, it sounds like you're a partial investor. What does it take for a company to IPO?
Obviously you have to go out and, find the financial group that will do the offering. And so a big portion of it is the preparation and getting your books ready so that you can go public, so that, everybody pretty much works under, the fair accounting standards, but you have to the books have to be done differently than you can with a private company. So you have to spend a lot of time just getting your books ready. You find usually the companies that will take you public and will issue the shares. You spend a lot of time doing road shows, talking to potential investors, whether they be, and a lot of those are just mutual funds, and then other investment banks, and that was the one thing that really,
sorry, that was the one thing. Oh no, I'll let you.
No, that was the one thing that really surprised my buddy, was how much time he was going to have to spend, doing presentations to potential, to commercial investors, to get enough interest in investors so they knew they could sell, the shares when they went public.
So with that, it also sounds like it takes the CEO and some of the other founders a lot of grit and determination. And I know that you have a kind of a background on kind of work culture, mental health, and determination and grit. But what kind of advice would you give those folks that are looking to start their startup and also looking to potentially have that exit route or have that IPO route?
Well, if you take it all the way back to startups, and you and I've worked together mentoring some startups, and I absolutely love it because some of the ideas that I've seen come across and some of the founders are just phenomenal to work for. But it all comes to, begin with the end in mind. And even if you're starting a company from scratch, know what you want to do. What's your exit strategy? Where do you want to be in, 1, 3, 5 years? What's your ultimate goal? It's now when you're starting, obviously it can change rapidly, but if you don't know what you're shooting for, you're just working. But I always like to do, strategic planning is one of the things I spend a lot of time with in my own companies and helping other companies. So frame out what you want the future to be, and then bring it back to even just quarterly or sometimes even monthly or weekly goals that you have to meet to get to where you want to be. And the other thing, I firmly believe in is, celebrate every success, even if it's, if you think it's small. It's interesting. Once your team realizes that they're winning, it becomes easier to keep that going. That momentum builds. If a football team starts the year at 0-5, it's hard to build much momentum after that. But when you're celebrating success along the way, and it doesn't even have to be a huge celebration, but just acknowledging the fact that, hey, this was a milestone of something that we said we were going to do, and we did it. Just creates that culture of winning, throughout the company, and carry that on regardless of how large it gets.
Did you notice kind of a culture change from the company going from private to public?
Yes, and a lot of that is just because of all the regulations that you have to follow to be a public company, and all the transparency. And I'm not saying that private companies aren't transparent, but you're now answering to shareholders with so many different agendas, and just the regulatory environment that you're working in. And that's where everybody ended up spending most of their time, and still do, is just being able to keep up with the regulatory environment. So, one of the benefits of being private, obviously you have, certain regulations you have to follow, but it's a lot easier than being a public company.
Well, just to kind of go over some other topics I wanted to dive into as well, is just your past racing experience. Both of us are fans of racing. I know you're a huge fan of, even a bigger fan of. And also you've mentioned that you're friends with Davey Jones, who was actually the last American to get the Le Mans. But yeah, just love to learn a little bit more about your racing career.
I totally lost you there for a second.
Oh,
so go back.
Yeah. Just
again,
wanted
please?
to just. Oh yeah. I just wanted to dive into your racing career a little bit more and learn how you got into it. And yeah, I know that you mentioned that one of your personal buddies is Davey Jones, who's one of the last Americans to finish and get first in the Le Mans.
Yeah, he's the last American to have stood at the top step of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. it's funny. We're actually we jokingly say we're brothers, even though his birthday's in June and mine's in September. I bought a used BMW a few years out of college and joined the BMW Car Club of America and went out to the track and did some high performance driving schools. And literally after the first one, I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun, but I want to get into racing. So we're actually, exchanging paint and we used to get away with a lot more back then than we do now. But so I purchased my first race car. And then, I'll say the rest is history. So literally my kids grew up at the track. They race karts on and off. I had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, actually, no, I had a baby and a 3-year-old, at the track on the weekends when I was racing. So they grew up around it, loved it, and I was very fortunate to be able to go up, work my way up through several different classes. I've driven some unbelievable cars. Right now, actually, I've stepped back a little bit and race a highly modified Boxster S in both the Porsche Club and then NASA's German Touring Series. It's an unbelievably well-handling car, and I say reasonably inexpensive to keep going. So
yeah,
and we picked that chassis because it's a mid-engine car instead of rear engine, and so literally it handles.
Just curious,
I haven't. Go ahead.
Is the Boxster is that one of your main vehicles right now, or what are your main vehicles that you drive? Just curious.
Oh, that's totally. That's a total race car. There's nothing street legal about it.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So it's there is. We took a Boxster S, took a cutting torch to it. We have to have a roll cage, obviously. It has a GT3 race suspension. It actually has an engine out of a 911. It's full race prep. There is absolutely nothing street legal about that car. And I've also raced a MX-5 Cup car, and then a Panos Esperante, which came off the American Le Mans series, which I raced that in the early 2000s, and for whatever reason kept it just because I love the car. And I'm actually rebuilding it now, and probably going to do some endurance racing with it. So, we'll see. I have to get out in the garage more.
So, just your racing career stemmed from you right out of college, or after a couple years after college, just getting that BMW, joining that club, the BMW club. Wow.
Yeah, I got the bug really quick. I always say, cars are a disease that can only be cured by poverty. And they got me pretty close to poverty a few times, but yeah, it's been fun, and just my love of cars in general. And I've been extremely blessed to have had the opportunity to have had some pretty fun cars over the years, just street cars. So that's been great. And just because of my time in the racing industry, I've gotten to test some just unbelievable race cars at different tracks. Under the guise of somebody trying to sell me a race car, but.
So what's your favorite track that you've ever driven in or raced in? Because I hear that the number one
Circuit of
track
the
in the world.
Americas.
Which one? Which one?
Circuit
Oh,
of
is it
the
Austin?
Americas in Austin.
That's the Austin. So it's right around the. It's your neighbor.
Yeah,
it's right in your backyard, basically.
Oh yeah, I mean, as soon as that track opened up, and I had the chance to race her, I'm like, oh, this is definitely the best track in the world. Now, obviously, they've built other tracks since then, and everybody tries to outdo each other. So, the next track is going to have a little bit more than that one. But so far as just a fun but pretty technical track, it's one of the half dozen best in the world.
Do you think that? Because I heard Nürburgring is like the perfectly built track, but it's also a huge track. Le Mans is amazing.
Yeah,
I heard Nürburgring is like Have you raced on the Nürburgring?
I mean,
okay.
I have not. I've never had the chance to go over to Europe. I would like to. That's something I have my sights set on. Potentially maybe going and racing an LMP3 in Europe or even a Porsche Cup car, but haven't done so to date. But that's still on my list.
Are you going to see the F1 race in Las Vegas coming up in a couple months? I think it's actually in November 20th.
Yeah, my wife and I have been talking about that, and that's probably what we're going to do for our wedding anniversary. So that's in process.
My buddy and I, we booked our tickets. We don't have tickets to the event, but we're just like, all right, let's go to Vegas. Let's see if we can see the race. Just because the tickets, the actually seating there is super expensive, but we're going to see if we can just view like an F1 car from any part of the track, which is most of the strip, and I don't know.
Oh, I mean, just the energy that will be there in the town will be unbelievable. Yeah. So, regardless where you're at, well, you'll be able to hear it. There's no doubt about that. And, find a great place to watch it. There'll be big screens everywhere, and even, inside the casinos will have viewing areas too that will be pretty nice. So it'll definitely be a good time.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we'll run into each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a couple other things. So you did mention that, you got into racing, you kind of got the bug, but then you're also building up a lot of these companies. I know I've already asked like a time balance question, but it seems like if you're kind of a semi-pro race car driver, and then also like a managing partner or director, building up a startup, what was like your typical day like? Like, what would you say your morning routine was? And then how would you just schedule out your day and your week? Just curious, just for those people that really want to be as effective and productive with their time. How'd you do it all?
You can't be good at managing other people if you can't manage yourself. And it's strange when you think that way, but really it's true. And so I try to keep myself to a pretty good schedule. Taking care of yourself physically is probably one of the most important things that you can do. Just because the amount of stress that you're under, I always made sure I had time to work out. I've done martial arts for years, lifted weights. In fact, I got to the point where I always made sure that, when I was booked in a hotel, that it either had a really nice gym or there was one close by. So, typically, roll out of bed first thing in the morning, grab my workout clothes, put a hat on, and hit the gym, unless I'm doing martial arts that evening. But you have to find, and I tell this to entrepreneurs and even senior executives, is you have to schedule time to work on the business and not in the business. And so anybody, and I learned this, and I've always told other people, set blocks of time. Excuse me. Set blocks of time that's private work time that you can't be interrupted. In fact, I would usually, I would book maybe 4 hours a week, which doesn't sound like much, but to have that time to literally just concentrate on the stuff that you need to, that only you can do, and, thinking about what you need to do to get the business to where it needs to go, and just literally brainstorming with yourself. I would take a notepad or my laptop, and I'd usually try and leave the office so I couldn't be disturbed. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, and really just, let your mind flow and think about, hey, what do I need to do next? What's some new things we should look at doing? What are some new strategies we might want to consider? And so that was always important. And also, like I said before, having a plan. I mean, no matter what size my company was, we always had we had a strategic plan, and it was shared throughout the organization. I mean, everybody knew, what we were trying to accomplish. And literally on the very first day when somebody would start, they would have a 1-page business plan given to them. It was basically, mission, vision, values, and then some short-term and long-term goals. And the whole idea is I wanted everybody to understand how they fit in. I wanted them to understand what we were trying to accomplish and where they fit in trying to make that happen. And unfortunately, corporations are horrible about that. Companies could be so much more successful if they'd spend more time communicating that. People want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. And that's one of the things I stress with startups that I work with. So, if you're a startup, you don't have a history, and there's a good chance you may not make it. But if you can really sell a great vision, and then, get people excited about what you're doing and tell them, hey, this is going to be us in 5 years or 10 years. And I use a tool called a painted picture a lot. I have have people paint the picture of what they want as their perfect or their ideal, ideal position at a place and time. It may not be the end game, maybe 10 years from now. And communicate that. And that's how you recruit people. You tell them, hey, we're going to, change the world by bringing, internet to Central Africa using microsatellites, something like that. And it doesn't have to be even that big of a, have that big of an impact, but let them know what they're part of. Get them excited about the fact that they can help and really contribute to doing something or to being part of something that's larger than them. And people get excited about that.
And I also think that's just why kind of sports are such a big thing in so many different cultures. They like just humans themselves. They like being part of an entity or group that is going after something, which is
I agree totally. People identify with sports. The nice thing is, throughout the game, at the end of the game, you know what the score is. You know where you're at. Mm-hmm. How many people inside of companies honestly don't know, truthfully, I guess, what the score is and where they're at. And, so they do their job to the best of their ability without even necessarily knowing how they contribute at all or how they can make a difference. And
I've noticed a lot more of. Oh, sorry.
No.
Oh, sorry. You can
one of the things when you talk about sports, though, all the great athletes have had great coaches, and it's the same in business. I had a phenomenal executive coach for years. I think that's one of the most important things you can have is a coach that's helping you. You need somebody you can talk to. And, the old saying is, especially higher up in the organization you are, you've all heard it's lonely at the top. It's
Right.
really, really lonely at the top because there's a lot of things you can't talk to anybody about. You can't bring it to your board of directors. You can't bring it to your other managers, senior managers, officers in the group. But to have somebody that you can go to and use as a sounding board and say, hey, here's the problem I'm dealing with. And just having, two people tossing about ideas helps so much. And then I'm also a really big believer in mentoring within a company. I would never have anybody start a position without being assigned a mentor. And then I even change that a little bit. And what I do now is, excuse me, is dual mentoring. So I will bring in a young new staff member and assign them to somebody that's very experienced. Now, the person that has a lot of experience can help the younger person, obviously can help them technically, just to know, what they need to work in the company, and even to forward their career. And what the younger person can help the older person do is say, hey, here's the latest technology. Here's how to use it, because you get a few years out of college, and a lot of things have changed, and that new person coming into the organization can bring a lot of that knowledge to somebody that's been there quite a while.
Especially this day and age, it seems like things are just changing like left and right. There's a new operating system update or a new piece of technology. It's always good. I love that kind of relationship.
It's astronomical.
Yeah. Well, John, I really appreciate your time. I think our listeners have learned a lot from your story. A couple things actually I'd love to invite you on another time as a guest and actually kind of dive into. I know that your wife is Colombian.
Oops, I just lost you again.
I want to dive into kind of more Latin American culture and business.
Start back
so
over.
In our next episode,
I lost that whole.
I'm just saying. I really appreciate your time today. But I'd love to invite you on again as a guest.
Pleasure.
I know that your wife's from Colombia. I'd love to talk to you about Latin American culture, business in Latin America, because this is another big kind of underserved community that
absolutely.
Spotlight really
I've learned. I have a lot of friends. She's from Colombia. I have a lot of friends down there. A lot of them own their own businesses, or a lot of them have moved up to the U.S. and have businesses here. And it is a totally different culture. We do things differently, and it's taken me. Well, it's actually taken me several years to learn how to adapt. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. And so you have to learn to adapt to that different culture. So I get a lot of coaching from my wife on that.
Definitely. Well, awesome, John. I'm excited for our next episode here. We can schedule that out in a little bit and talk more about adapting to different business cultures. But really loved our conversation today. I'm going to click the... actually, is there any other last thing that you'd like to give our entrepreneurs or give our listeners? Anything that you're working on, any last minute advice?
A few, I guess a few closing pieces of advice. First of all, with your business, obviously you should have mission, vision, and values. Your family should have that too. And so, you and your wife, set that. And when your kids get a little bit older, they participate in it. You should have long-term plans, short-term plans. If I was to do it all over again, uh, I would have set more goals for myself, so I would actually know what I'm aiming for. Everything I did was, honestly, early in my career, it just happened. I took some chances and they paid off, but I didn't have a real strong plan on what I wanted to do, how I wanted to progress, even financial goals. So, that type of planning, I think, is extremely important. And I guess another thing I'd really say is, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. What's another thing that?
No,
there's like a 2-second delay.
Another thing I'd say is never stop learning. And I found the statistic interesting. 43% of college graduates never read another book after college. And you should always be, learning. I mean, I got my degree in engineering, but things change constantly. And I really did not do that much engineering before I went into corporate administration. And literally, I always joke that I woke up every morning. It's like, well, I've never had this many people working for me before, and I've never done this before. So I spent a lot of time reading a lot of books, participating in CEO organizations. I still, I drive a lot, and so I always have an Audible book going. So keep learning. Have an inner circle. This was an interesting statistic I heard, that you are the average of your top 5 connections. So your top 5 friends or associates, you really are the average of that group. And so that will end up defining who you are. And so you want to pick the people with the right values, and also know what you stand for and don't waver on that.
I love that.
So I think as long as you have a firm foundation and you're well grounded, that'll pay off, immensely throughout your life.
I love that. I love that advice, John, and I really appreciate your time today. And I think our listeners are going to learn a lot and ultimately start planning. I think for myself, I'm definitely going to start planning a lot. Just being more strategic, even with my days, because I think I'm really inspired by your story, your career, and your life, and so I'm excited for our part 2 to be coming up here in the next little bit. I'll talk to you soon, John. Thanks so much for it. Well, I'll just stop.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and look forward to talking again.
Thank you so much.